Orchestrated narrative rewrite, eliminating AI patterns, intensifying pacing, crafting shocking hook. Rose Calloway pressed her sister's wedding veil into the kitchen fire at dawn and watched it burn. Not in grief, not in rage, in cold, clear decision. Eleanor was gone. The contract wasn't. 22 families, 300 acres. One name on a document that said a daughter of Henry Calloway, and Rose was still a daughter of Henry Calloway, even if nobody in Dry Fork had ever once looked at her like she mattered. She folded the ash into her palm, walked to the mirror, and pinned up her hair. If you love stories about women who choose duty over everything, and love finds them anyway, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and stay with me until the very last word. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Rose's story travels. The church at Dry Fork held 63 people on the morning of September 14, 1878, and every single one of them went silent the moment Rose pushed open the door. She felt it land on her like weather. The stares, the held breath. A woman in the second pew grabbed her neighbor's arm. Somewhere near the back, a child asked too loudly why the bride looked different, and its mother shushed it with a sound like a cut rope. Rose kept walking. Eleanor's dress was 2 inches too long and cut for softer shoulders. The veil sat wrong at her temples, tight enough to ache. She did not reach up to adjust it. She had worn worse discomforts for longer without letting anyone see. And she was not about to start showing it now, in front of 63 people, who had spent her entire life looking straight through her to her sister. At the end of the aisle, Wade Harland stood with his back half turned, watching the door she'd just come through, waiting for Eleanor. Rose did not slow down. She passed her father in the first pew. Henry Calloway sat with his Sunday hat crushed between both hands, shoulders caved, eyes on the floor. He had not looked at her directly in 3 days, not since Eleanor's note appeared on the kitchen table, and the whole fragile structure Rose had been holding up alone came apart in front of him all at once. She had given him one night to fall to pieces. Then she had sat down at his desk and started writing letters. She reached the altar. Wade Harland turned. She had heard of him the way you heard about drought, by the damage it left, and the length of it, and the fact that it always came back. Former Texas Ranger, 32 years old, built the Harland spread from 400 acres of contested scrubland through 7 years of work that people in Dry Fork still talked about in the same breath as the war. Dark eyes, under a hat he hadn't taken off, a jaw that looked like it had been set against something for a long time and never quite released. He looked at her and understood immediately, the way a man trained to read situations reads them. Not slowly, not in pieces, but all at once, like a door opening onto a room he hadn't expected. Rose lifted the veil herself before he could speak. "I know," she said. "She's not coming." 63 people did not breathe. Wade Harland's eyes moved across her face. His hands stayed at his sides. "Who are you?" "Rose Calloway, Eleanor's younger sister." "Where is she?" "Gone." Rose kept her voice level and her chin up. "She left 3 days ago. She left a note. It wasn't long." "What did it say?" "That she was sorry." A sound from behind her, her father rising to his feet, the scrape of the pew, the particular heaviness of a man who has let things go too long, trying to stop them too late. "Rose!" Henry Calloway's voice cracked down the middle. "Rose, you stop this right now. This is not what was arranged. You have no right to stand there in that dress and pretend that you can—" "Papa." She did not turn around. "Sit down." "I will not sit down. I am your father, and I am telling you—" "You are my father." Now she turned. Henry Calloway stood in the aisle, face the color of old ash, mouth working around words that kept coming out wrong. He was not a bad man. He had never been a bad man. But grief had taken him somewhere Rose could not follow. And then the drinking had taken him further. And for 18 months she had been running 2 ranches worth of decisions on her own, while he sat in the parlor and looked at her mother's empty chair. She had loved him through all of it. She was still loving him through it right now. "You're my father," she said again, quieter. "And I love you." "But you signed a contract you didn't read, and then you stopped getting out of bed, and Eleanor ran. And someone has to be standing at this altar today, or Pruitt files Monday, and we lose everything Mama built. So I need you to hear me." She held his gaze. "Sit down." Henry's jaw worked. His eyes went red at the edges. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, but his voice had lost its footing. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've known for 4 weeks. She turned back to the altar. "Sit down, Papa, please." The silence stretched long enough that Rose felt it in her teeth. Then the pew creaked. Her father sat down. Rose faced Wade Harland, who had watched this exchange without moving, without expression, without giving her anything to read. She reached into the bodice of Eleanor's dress and pulled out a folded document. She had been carrying it against her ribs since before the sun came up. "The contract," she said, and held it out. Dated August 3rd, a daughter of Henry Calloway to marry Wade Harland by September 14th, with full merger of land upon legal marriage. She kept her hand steady. "It does not specify which daughter." Wade looked at the paper. He did not take it. "You read the contract." "I wrote half of it. My father's eyes have been failing. I've been managing the correspondence for 14 months. A murmur moved through the church like wind through dry grass. Rose heard it and ignored it. "So you planned this," Wade said. "Not an accusation, a statement of fact being verified." "I prepared for it. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Eleanor planning to run and me deciding what to do about it are 2 separate things." Something shifted in his expression. Fractional. "You knew she was going to run." "I knew for 4 weeks." "And you didn't tell your father?" "Telling my father would have meant watching him drink himself into the floor and miss the filing deadline entirely." She lowered the hand holding the contract. "So no, I didn't tell him. I made a plan." From the back of the church, smooth and unhurried, a voice Rose had been expecting since she walked through the door. "Well, this is something." Judge Silas Pruitt. She did not look. She had no intention of giving him the satisfaction of her attention. Not yet. Not here. "Harlan, you gonna let a girl talk you into a bait and switch right here in front of the Lord? Can't say I'd blame you for walking. Man in your position, with your reputation." "Pruitt." Wade said the name the way you say enough. Flat, final. Directed at no one in the room but the one person who needed to hear it. "You weren't invited." "Free church, free country." The smile was audible. "Just looking out for a fellow. You're looking out for your rail contract." Wade's eyes hadn't moved from Rose. "We both know that." Rose watched something settle in his face. A decision forming the way weather formed. Gathering, darkening, committing. She had not let herself hope until this moment, because hope before the decision was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she watched it happen, and she felt it move through her chest like the first rain after dry season. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Yes?" "You understand that if I say yes right now, there's no undoing it." "I understand that." "You understand that I don't know you, that I agreed to a different arrangement entirely, that I have every legal and reasonable right to walk out that door. I understand all of that. And you're still standing there. I'm still standing here. He looked at her for a long moment, not at Eleanor's dress, not at the borrowed veil, not at the contract in her hand, at her, and Rose stood still under it and did not look away, because she had not come this far to look away from anything. Wade turned to Reverend Marsh. Continue. The preacher blinked. Mr.
Harlan, if you need a moment to
Continue. The vows were fast. Rose's voice was steady throughout. Wade's was flat and deliberate, each word placed with the care of a man who understood that spoken words in front of witnesses were the same as signed documents. When Reverend Marsh reached, "You may kiss the bride," Wade looked at Rose once, measuring, unreadable, and nodded, short and formal, and turned toward the door. Rose picked up the front of Eleanor's dress and followed him out. The sky outside had gone the color of a bad bruise, heavy and low. Pruitt stood on the church steps with two men Rose recognized as Missouri-Texas surveyors, all three of them watching with the particular patience of people who believed they had already won and were simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "Interesting day, Mrs. Harland," Pruitt said pleasantly. "For now." Rose looked at him directly for the first time. "Judge Pruitt?" Mrs. Harland.
You came all the way out here to watch?
She kept her voice conversational. "That tells me you were worried." Pruitt's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "Just a concerned citizen." "Concerned citizens don't bring surveyors to weddings." She held his gaze for one more beat, long enough to make the point, then turned away. Done with him. For now. Wade was already at his horse. She crossed to the buckboard, climbed up, took the reins. "Harlan Ranch is north," he said, not looking at her. "I know. I have the survey maps." He looked at her then. Brief. Something that wasn't quite surprise. "Follow close. Storm's coming." "I've driven in storms before." "Not as my wife." He turned the gray north without waiting. "Keep up." She kept up. The drive took just under an hour. The sky built itself into something serious overhead, the kind of clouds that didn't threaten so much as promise. Rose drove with both hands on the reins, and did not let herself think about Eleanor, or her father, or the expression on Pruitt's face. Not yet. There would be time for all of that. Right now she catalogued what she could see of the Harland property as it came into view. Fencing new and properly strung. Barn roof recently patched. Cattle in good weight for this late in the dry season. He ran the place right. She had suspected as much from the accounts she'd seen, but it was different to see it. They worked the horses into the barn without being asked to collaborate, and without discussing it. It happened naturally. Two people who knew how barns worked, moving around each other in the close space. Rose noticed he favored his left shoulder slightly when he lifted the saddle. A pull, a habit, something old. A scar, maybe. The kind of thing a man stopped noticing about himself years ago. When the horses were settled, she walked out to find him at the fence, looking north at the coming storm. The first lightning moved in the distance, white and silent. "There's a room upstairs," he said. "Second door. Sheets are clean. Bread and salt pork in the kitchen." "Thank you." "I'll be in the barn." He didn't move. "Mr. Harlan." "Wade." She paused. "Wade, I need you to know, I have documents, evidence of what Pruitt's been doing with the rail contracts, the fraudulent land valuations, the payments to county officials. My mother started gathering it before she died. I've been adding to it." She watched his profile. "We have 9 days before he files, but we have enough to stop him if we move right." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been building that case?" he said. "Almost a year." He turned then, looked at her with that same measuring weight he'd used at the altar. And this time, she saw something else in it. Something she didn't yet have a name for, but recognized the shape of. "You planned all of it," he said. "The documents, the letters, coming to that altar today. Everything I could plan." "What couldn't you plan?" Rose held his gaze. "You." The wind picked up. Wade looked back at the horizon. 9 days, he said. 9 days. "Get some rest then." He walked toward the barn. "We start at dawn." Rose went inside. She climbed the stairs in the dark, found the second door, sat on the edge of a strange bed in a stranger's house, wearing her sister's wedding dress. And for exactly 30 seconds, she let her hands shake. 30 seconds. She had given herself 30 seconds for 2 years now, every time something was harder than she'd let anyone see. Then she folded the dress over the chair with the same precision she folded survey maps, unpinned Eleanor's veil, set it flat on the dresser. The storm broke at midnight, rain on the roof like thrown gravel, lightning splitting the dark in halves. Rose lay still and thought about the 9 days ahead, and the man in the barn below, who had said, "Continue," without hesitation, and not yet explained why. Down in the barn, Wade Harland sat on a hay bale and did not sleep. He was thinking about a woman who had walked into a church full of people waiting for her to fail, had looked Silas Pruitt in the face without flinching, and had handed him a document she'd been carrying against her skin since before sunrise. He was thinking about the way she told her father to sit down, and how her father had. There was a scar along Wade's left shoulder that ached in wet weather, had ached since a night 6 years ago in a canyon outside Del Rio, when he'd been 3 seconds too slow, and his partner, Tommy Reeves, had taken a bullet meant for both of them. Wade had carried that 3 seconds every day since, had carried it into the silence he kept, the land he built, the careful nothing he'd made of his personal life. He had agreed to marry Eleanor Calloway because the contract made sense, and because marrying a woman who was essentially a business arrangement felt like penance that might eventually pay down the debt he owed to a dead man. He had not expected Rose. He had not planned for someone like Rose. Outside, the storm worked itself out across the Texas Panhandle, and Wade Harland sat in the dark with a feeling he didn't have words for yet, and waited for morning, the only thing left he knew how to trust. But somewhere under the waiting, under the careful nothing, something had shifted, quiet as a compass needle turning, and he could feel it, even if he couldn't yet say what it meant. Morning would come, and they had 9 days. Dawn came hard and fast, the way it always did after a storm. The sky scrubbed clean and brutally bright, the ground still dark with water that hadn't finished soaking in. Rose was already in the kitchen when Wade came through the back door. She had found the coffee, found the pan, found the salt pork and the cornmeal, and had made something out of all three that was hot and ready and sitting on the table. She was standing at the window with her own cup when he stopped in the doorway and looked at the food and then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I was up anyway." He came to the table, sat, picked up the fork, ate without ceremony. Rose refilled her cup and stayed at the window and looked out at the north pasture where his cattle were moving in the early light. And she thought about what she needed to say and how to say it without it sounding like what it was, which was a woman telling a man she'd been married to for less than 12 hours that everything he thought he knew about the threat against his land was only half the picture. "The survey maps I mentioned," she said. "I need to show you something. After breakfast." She turned. He was eating with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent years treating food as fuel rather than pleasure. She recognized it, because she did the same thing. "It can't wait long," she said. 10 minutes won't change 9 days. He looked up briefly. "Sit down. You're making me uneasy standing there like you're about to deliver bad news." "I am about to deliver bad news." "Then sit down and deliver it properly." She sat. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him across the table and said, "Pruitt isn't just filing a land claim. He's been running a parallel title scheme through the county recorder's office for 8 months. False transfers, backdated deeds. He has a man inside, clerk named Bellows, been taking payments since February." She paused. "He's not trying to buy your land, Wade. He's trying to prove he already owns it." Wade put his fork down. "Show me," he said. She had brought the locked box in from the buckboard before first life. She set it on the table now and opened it with a key she wore on a cord at her wrist and laid out the documents one by one. Letters, receipts, a hand-drawn map with Pruitt's notations in the margins, 2 county recorder pages that were clearly altered, and a signed statement from a Mexican vaquero named Domingo Reyes, who had witnessed a meeting between Pruitt and Bellows in an Amarillo hotel room in April, and had written down everything he'd heard because Domingo had worked Callaway land for 11 years and understood exactly what was being planned. Wade read everything. He read slowly, the way a man reads when he's not reading for information so much as building a case in his own mind, checking each piece against the last. Rose did not rush him. She refilled both cups and waited. When he finished, he set the last paper down and looked at the table for a moment without speaking. "Your mother started this," he said finally. "She didn't trust the railroad from the day they first sent men through the valley. She said anyone offering money that good for land that valuable wasn't buying. They were clearing." Rose straightened the papers at the edges. She kept records of everything, every offer, every conversation, every man who came to the door with a survey rod and a smile. She died before she could do anything with them, but she left them in order. Rose paused. She always left things in order. "And you've been adding to them." "For almost a year. Domingo brought me the hotel statement in June. The recorder pages I got through a friend of my mother's in Amarillo who works at the land office. She copied them herself and sent them wrapped in a bolt of fabric like they were dress patterns." Wade looked at her. "That was dangerous." "Yes. You put her at risk." "She understood the risk. She offered." Rose met his eyes. "My mother built relationships with people who were careful and smart and had reasons of their own to see Pruitt stopped. I've been using those relationships. I'm not sorry for it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" Not, "What do you want?" Not, "What's the plan?" "What do you need from me?" Rose felt something ease in her chest that had been tight since before the wedding. "I need access to your ranch records, deed history, boundary surveys, everything going back to when you filed the original claim. If Pruitt's backdating transfers, the only way to prove the fraud is to show the unbroken chain of legitimate title." She folded her hands on the table. "I also need to ride out to your eastern fence line this morning. There's a boundary marker that Pruitt's survey shows in a different location than your original filing. I think it's been moved." Moved. Physically, I think someone moved the stake. Wade stood up. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door and put it on and said, "Get your boots." They rode out to the eastern line with the sun still low and the grass wet enough to darken their boots to the ankle. Wade rode the gray. Rose had saddled a dun mare from his barn. She'd asked once, he'd nodded once, and that was all it had needed to be. She noted that he approved of the way she handled horses, the same way she noted everything, quietly, without comment, filing it in the column of things that mattered. The boundary marker was a stone post sunk into the ground at the junction of 3 property lines, the kind that had been set by the original territorial survey and hadn't been touched in 15 years. Except it had been touched. Rose saw it before they dismounted. The ground around the base was darker than it should have been. Soil recently disturbed and repacked. The kind of careful work that was meant to look undisturbed, but didn't quite succeed if you knew what you were looking at. She swung down and crouched at the base, and Wade stood behind her. "There," she said, and pointed to the compressed earth on the north face. "Someone dug this out and reset it. Not more than 2 months ago. The soil's still settling." "How far is it off?" "If it matches Pruitt's survey, about 40 feet south of where it should be." She stood. "That's not much on its own, but combined with the false recorder entries, it builds a pattern. It shows physical tampering, not just paperwork." She brushed the dirt from her hands. "I need to measure it against the original survey chain." "I have the chain back at the house." "I know. I saw it in the barn last night." He looked at her. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "I was putting up the horses."
I didn't say you were snooping. Your face said it. Something moved in his expression that might, in another man, have been the beginning of a smile. "My face doesn't say much." "No," Rose agreed, "but it says some things." They measured the line that morning, working in near silence, with the survey chain stretched between them. Rose calling numbers and Wade driving stakes, while she recorded measurements in a small leather notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. They worked well together. She noticed it, and she suspected he did too, though neither of them said so. There was a particular rhythm to working with someone who understood what you were doing without being told, who moved when they needed to move and held still when they needed to hold still. And Rose had spent enough years working alone to recognize when that rhythm was absent, and now, apparently, when it was present. The marker was 38 feet out of position. 38 feet, Wade said. 38 feet. Rose closed the notebook. Enough to shift the eastern water access into contested territory. She looked at him. That's what this is really about. Not just the rail line. The creek that runs along your eastern boundary is the only reliable water source in this part of the valley. Pruitt's survey puts it in undefined territory. His backdated deeds claim prior right. She paused. Whoever controls that water controls the whole valley. Every ranch that relies on the creek. Wade was quiet for a long moment, looking at the surveyed line. "He's been planning this for years," he said. "Since before my mother died. Possibly longer." Rose tucked the notebook away. "He's patient. He does things slowly and legally and in layers, so that by the time you see the whole picture, it's too late to pull the pieces apart." She looked at Wade. "That's why the 9 days matter. After he files, the burden shifts. We'd be proving fraud after the fact instead of preventing it." And what do we do with what we have?
"We go to the Territorial Land Commissioner. Not Pruitt's office, not the county recorder. The commissioner in Austin. I've already written a letter. I need your signature, and I need to send it with the evidence attached." She held his gaze. "I also need the names of the other ranchers in this valley who've been pressured by Pruitt's men. I know of 4. I suspect there are more." "There are 7. Wade said it without hesitation. "I've been keeping track." Rose looked at him. "You've been keeping track?" "Didn't know what to do with it yet." He paused. "Didn't have anyone to do it with." He said the last part like it cost him something to say. Flat and simple and exact. Rose heard what was under it. The years of working alone, building alone, holding against something alone, without knowing if the holding would ever be enough. "You have someone now," she said. It was a plain statement, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return, and she meant it that way. She watched him take it in, and she did not soften it or qualify it or look away. "I reckon I do," he said quietly. They rode back in the mid-morning warmth, the sky fully committed to blue now, and when they reached the barnyard, 3 of his hands were waiting near the corral fence, with the particular posture of men who had something to say and weren't sure how to start. Rose recognized the posture. She had seen it enough times on Callaway land. Men measuring up a situation they hadn't been told about and trying to decide whether to accept it. The eldest of the 3, a lean man in his 40s named Harker, took off his hat when Rose dismounted and put it back on immediately after, as if he'd remembered and then forgotten the protocol. "Harland," he said, "saw the smoke from Rhea's land this morning. Eastern section, near the creek cut." Wade's jaw set. "How big?"
Not a range fire, small, controlled like.
Harker glanced at Rose, just briefly, assessing. "Like somebody burning something they didn't want found." "Domingo's place," Rose said. Both men looked at her. "Domingo Reyes. He gave me a statement against Pruitt in June, signed and witnessed." She kept her voice level. "If Pruitt's men found out about it, they'd want the original destroyed." "You have a copy," Wade said. "The copy I have is the only copy. Domingo kept the original at his home." She paused. "We need to ride out there." Harker looked between them. "You want the 3 of us to come?" "Yes," Wade said. He was already at the barn door. "Saddle up. Rose." She was right behind him. They found Domingo Reyes in his yard with his wife Maria and their youngest daughter, the 3 of them salvaging what they could from the corner of the house where the fire had eaten through the wall before Domingo and his 2 older sons had beaten it back with wet blankets and dirt. The original statement was gone. The corner of the house where Domingo kept his papers was ash. He was a small, steady man with gray at his temples and a way of standing that was very still and very certain. And when Rose dismounted, he took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Miss Rose," he said. "Domingo." She took his hand with both of hers. "I'm sorry." "The family is safe." He said it like a man who had decided to say only what was true and leave the rest alone. "The statement." "Gone." He looked at Wade. "Mr. Harland." "Reyes." Wade dismounted and stood next to Rose, and something about the way he stood, directly beside her and slightly forward, a small shift barely visible, made Harker and the other 2 hands straighten slightly and look at the tree line with new attention. "Anyone see who said it?" "My son Carlos saw 2 men on the road before dawn. Didn't know them. Missouri-Texas men, he thinks, by the horses." Domingo looked back at Rose. "I can write it again." "Domingo, I can write it again," he said. And there was no waver in it. "I remember every word. I was there." He looked at Wade steadily. "Pruitt offered me money last spring to leave this land. Told me my family would be better off somewhere east. I told him my family had been on this land since before Texas was Texas, and we weren't going anywhere." He put his hat back on. "That offer tells me everything about what he is. I'll write it again." Maria Reyes came out of the damaged house carrying a tray with water cups and set it on the yard table without being asked. And the familiarity of the gesture, the simple certainty that people who had come to help would be given water, made something move in Rose's chest that she didn't have time for right now. "I'll need paper," Domingo said. "I have it." Rose reached into her jacket. Wade stepped back slightly and looked at the tree line while Rose and Domingo sat at the yard table, and she wrote as he dictated, his words careful and exact. Better this time, because he had had months to live with what he'd witnessed, and the details had only sharpened. When it was done, Rose signed as witness and handed the pen to Wade,
who read it through once and signed below her without being asked. Domingo looked at both signatures and folded the paper into thirds and held it out to Rose. "You keep it safer than I can," he said. "I'll get it to Austin inside the week." She tucked it into the locked box that Harker had brought from the saddlebag. "Domingo, you should know. I think things are going to move fast now. Pruitt doesn't send men to burn papers unless he's getting nervous." "Good." Domingo said it simply. "A nervous man makes mistakes." "He does." Rose looked at him. "He also gets dangerous." "Then we stay close." He looked at Wade. "All of us."
On the ride back, the afternoon pressing down warm and serious, Wade came alongside Rose on the trail and said quietly, "He trusts you. His family has known mine for 20 years. My mother helped Maria when her second son was born sick. There wasn't a doctor." She kept her eyes on the trail. "Some debts you don't forget." "That's not what I meant." Rose looked at him. "He trusts your judgment," Wade said. "He let you write the statement without reading it back. He gave you the only copy and didn't hesitate." He paused. "That kind of trust doesn't come from 20 years. It comes from what you've done in the years you had." Rose didn't answer right away. The gray moved alongside the dun, and the grass moved alongside the trail, and the sky was enormous and unequivocal, the way Texas sky always was, offering nothing it didn't mean. "My mother taught me that the people who work land alongside you are not separate from the land," she said finally. "They're part of it. What happens to them happens to the ranch. What happens to the ranch happens to them." She looked straight ahead. "I don't know if that's wisdom or just practicality, but it's how she ran things, and it's how I run things." "It's both," Wade said. They reached the ranch as the sun started its long lean toward the western flats, and Rose went straight to the desk in the front room where she had laid out the documents that morning, and began drafting the letter to the land commissioner in Austin. She wrote for 2 hours, stopping twice to check dates against the ledger, once to cross-reference the recorder pages. The house was quiet around her. At some point, without her quite noticing, someone had put a fresh cup of coffee at her elbow. She looked up. Wade was in the doorway, with his hat in his hand, which she was starting to understand was how he stood when he was saying something he meant. "Hands are fed," he said. "There's food in the kitchen when you're ready. I'll be a few more minutes. Take your time." He didn't move. "Wade?" "Yeah?" "Why did you say continue today?" She looked at him directly. "You could have walked out. You had every right and you knew it, and Pruitt knew it, and every person in that church knew it." She held his gaze. "So why didn't you?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because you told me the truth before you had to. The veil came up, and you could have waited. Could have let the ceremony finish and let me find out later, when it was too late to do anything about it. But you didn't. You told me the second you could." He looked at her steadily. "In my experience, people who tell the truth when lying would be easier are worth listening to." Rose looked at him across the lamplit room. "That's all?" she said. Something crossed his face, quiet and careful, and not yet ready to be said out loud. "That's enough for now," he said. "Eat when you're done." He walked back toward the kitchen, and Rose turned back to the letter and wrote the last 3 sentences and set the pen down and sat for a moment in the quiet of the house. 7 days left. She had a signed statement, a set of fraudulent deeds, a moved boundary marker, a letter to Austin, and a husband who had stood next to her in Domingo Reyes's yard without being asked and signed his name below hers like it was the most natural thing. It was not nothing. She capped the ink, straightened the papers, and went to find something to eat. The letter to Austin went out on the Wednesday stage with Harker writing escort to the post office in town, which Rose had asked for without explaining why, and Wade had arranged without asking questions. That was the thing she was learning about him. He processed information in a particular order, facts first, implications second. And he didn't ask questions he already knew the shape of the answer to. She was learning other things, too. He woke before dawn every morning, and he made the coffee himself before she could get to it. And he always made enough for two without being asked. He checked the eastern fence line every evening on his way back from the south pasture, a habit she recognized as new, because Harker mentioned once, without intending to, that the boss hadn't ridden that line in months before this week. He had not moved his things into the second room or suggested any change to the arrangement, and Rose had not raised it. And they had developed between them a careful, functional distance that was not cold exactly, but was precise. Like two people who had agreed on the edges of a thing without discussing the middle. On Thursday morning, 5 days before Pruitt's filing deadline, Henry Calloway rode in. Rose heard the horse from the kitchen and looked out and felt the specific tightening that her father's arrivals had been producing in her chest for the better part of 2 years. She dried her hands and went to the door. He looked smaller on horseback than he used to. He had always been a large man in her memory, broad-shouldered, filling a doorway. But grief and whiskey had taken something structural out of him, and what was left was a man who looked like he was carrying more weight than his frame was built for anymore. He pulled up in the yard and looked at her, and then passed her at the house, taking in the repaired porch post and the new curtain she had hung in the kitchen window, and whatever else he was cataloging. "Papa," she said. "Rose." He dismounted, slowly, favoring his right knee the way he had since last winter. "You look well." "I am well." He turned his hat in his hands. "I came to apologize." "You don't have to do that out here." "Yes, I do." He looked at her directly, which he had not done at the church, and had not done in a long time before that. His eyes were clear, she noticed. Whatever he had spent the last 3 days doing, it had not involved the bottle, or not entirely. "I let you carry too much. I've known it for a long time, and I told myself it was necessary because there wasn't anyone else. But that was a lie, I told myself, because it was easier than getting up." He stopped, started again. "What you did at that altar, I was angry. I was humiliated in front of the whole town, and I was angry." He paused. "And then I came home, and I sat in your mother's chair for 3 days, and I thought about every decision she ever made, and every decision I ever didn't make, and I realized, you are more her daughter than I ever gave you credit for." Rose looked at her father for a long moment. She had been waiting for some version of this conversation for 18 months. She had imagined it with anger, with coldness, with careful, measured words that would make clear exactly how much she had borne alone. But standing in the yard in the early morning, with the coffee still warm on the stove behind her, she found that what she actually felt was just tired. And underneath the tired, something that was almost relief. "Come inside," she said. "Wade's in the south pasture. He'll be back by mid-morning." "I should speak to him." "You should have coffee first." They sat at the kitchen table, and Rose poured, and Henry wrapped his hands around the cup and looked at the locked box sitting on the side table by the window. She had not moved it since she'd opened it with Wade on the first morning. She found she liked having it visible. "The documents," he said. "Yes." "Your mother's files." "And mine, and Domingo's statement, and 3 other signed accounts from ranchers Pruitt pressured last year." She looked at her father. "I sent the letter to the land commissioner in Austin on Wednesday, with copies of everything." Henry was quiet. He looked at the box, and then at his coffee, and then at his hands. I knew she was gathering things, he said. Your mother. I knew there were files. After she died, I couldn't... He stopped. I should have kept adding to them. She would have kept adding. I kept adding. I know. He looked up. Rose, I need to tell you something about the contract. She went still. The one I signed with Harland. He turned his hat again, a slow rotation. I want you to know that I read it. I read every word of it before I signed. I know that, Papa. I wrote it. I know you wrote it. His voice was careful now, deliberate. I want you to know that I understood what I was doing when I signed it. I understood that Eleanor wasn't going to be the one at that altar. He held her gaze. I've known your sister her whole life, Rose. I knew when she started meeting that surveyor. I knew she was going to run. The kitchen went very quiet. You knew, Rose said. I suspected, strongly. He set his hat on the table. And I did nothing about it because I told myself it would work itself out. That Eleanor would come to her senses. That I wouldn't have to make a hard choice. He exhaled slowly. That was cowardice. And it left you making the hard choice alone. Rose looked at her father across the table. She thought about the 4 weeks she had spent preparing, the letters she had written at his desk while he slept, the evidence she had gathered, the veil she had burned. She thought about walking down that aisle in a borrowed dress and lifting it herself. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Because I want you to know that you weren't a second choice. His voice broke slightly at the edges, and he steadied it. You were never a second choice. You were always the one I trusted with this. He paused. I was just too much of a coward to say it to your face before I made you prove it. Rose sat with that. She did not let herself cry, and she did not dismiss it, and she did not tell him it was all right. Because it wasn't entirely. And her mother had taught her that the truth was worth more than comfort most of the time. I'll work on forgiving you, she said finally. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. That's more than I deserve. Probably. She refilled his cup. Tell me everything you know about Bellows. Henry looked up sharply. The county recorder's clerk. He's been taking payments from Pruitt since February. I have the receipt records. But I need to know if you've had any direct dealings with him in the last year. Any filings, any requests for copies, anything that would have put him in contact with our records. Her father's expression shifted into something focused and present that she hadn't seen on him in a long time. It was his working face, the one she remembered from before her mother died, and the sight of it did something to her chest she wasn't prepared for. Last April, he said slowly, I filed an extension request on the water usage agreement for the South Creek. Bellows processed it. He paused. He asked me 3 times if I had the original title survey on hand. Said he needed to verify the boundary description. I told him it was in the house. Did he send anyone to verify? He said a clerk would come out. I forgot about it. Henry looked at her. No one ever came, Rose. I just forgot. You didn't forget. You were drinking. She said it plainly, without cruelty. Did you leave him alone with the office files at any point? Her father's face told her the answer before he said it. 20 minutes, he said. I had to check on the horses. There was a problem with one of the mares. 20 minutes at most. 20 minutes was more than enough. Rose looked at the locked box. She was thinking about the recorder pages she had, the altered entries, the careful forgery that had looked almost right, if you weren't looking for it, but showed its seams once you knew where to press. 20 minutes in an office full of original filings was 20 minutes with a pen and a practiced hand. He copied our title survey, she said, and he gave Pruitt the boundary measurements. That's how Pruitt knew exactly where to move the stake. Henry looked old and very tired. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing and tell me if there's anything else. She held his gaze. Anything you signed, any conversation with any of Pruitt's men, any document that passed through your hands in the last 2 years that felt wrong after the fact. I need everything. For the next hour and a half, Henry Calloway talked, and Rose wrote in the small leather notebook. And when Wade came in from the south pasture and stopped in the kitchen doorway, he read the room in the way he read all situations. Completely, quickly, without announcing it. And he poured himself coffee and sat at the end of the table and said nothing. He listened. Rose looked at him once, and he gave a small nod that said, "I've got this." And she went back to her notebook. When Henry was done, Rose set the pen down and looked at what she had and said, "This is enough. This fills in the last pieces." Wade looked at Henry directly. "Mr. Calloway, I need to ask you something." Henry looked at him. "All right." "The 7 ranches Pruitt's been pressuring. You know most of them. George Fowler, the Reyes family, Holt and his sons, the others." Wade set his cup down. "If we called a meeting, here or at a neutral location, how many of them would come?" "All of them," Henry said without hesitating. "They've been scared and separate. Nobody's talked to each other because Pruitt made sure of that, kept them each thinking they were alone." He looked at his daughter. "But if someone called a meeting and told them they weren't alone—" "Tomorrow night," Rose said. She looked at Wade. "Here." He looked back at her. "Here. We have the space, we have the evidence, and we control who knows about it in advance." She paused. "I don't want this going through town beforehand. I don't want Bellows hearing that people are gathering." "Harker can ride to each of them personally," Wade said. "Today." "Tell them 7 o'clock, Rose said. "Tell them to come quiet and come alone." Henry was looking at the two of them with an expression Rose couldn't quite name. Something careful and wondering, like a man watching something he hadn't expected to see. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He shook his head slowly. "Your mother would have liked him," he said, meaning Wade. "That's all." Rose did not look at Wade when he said that. She looked at her notebook. But she felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather. Not the thing itself yet, but the clear signal that the thing was coming. Henry left before noon. He rode back toward Calloway land, and Rose stood at the fence and watched him go, and Wade came to stand beside her. "He's steadier than I expected," Wade said. "He has good days." She watched until her father crested the hill. "Today was a good day." "You think he'll hold?" "I think he'll try." She turned back toward the house. "That's more than I had a week ago." Harker rode out that afternoon to all 7 ranches, quiet and direct, the way Wade had asked him. Rose spent the afternoon recopying the key documents onto clean paper, a summary version of the evidence, organized for men who were ranchers, not lawyers, who needed to understand what had been done to them and what could still be done about it. She worked at the desk, and Wade worked at the table across from her with the ranch ledgers, and the house held a particular kind of occupied silence that Rose found she was no longer uncomfortable inside. At some point he said, without looking up, "Your father asked me this morning whether I was treating you right." Rose looked up from her papers. "When?" "While you were getting the coffee. He came in from the barn early." Wade turned a page in the ledger. He stood in the doorway and looked at me and said, "My daughter doesn't complain. That means if something's wrong, you won't hear about it from her. You'll have to pay attention." Then he went inside. Rose looked at him. "What did you say?" she said. "I said I was paying attention." Wade glanced up briefly. He seemed satisfied with that. She looked at him for a moment longer, and then looked back at her papers and did not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying that wasn't already in the room. The riders started arriving at 7. George Fowler came first, a big, quiet man who ran cattle on the western end of the valley and had the particular wariness of someone who had learned to be careful after being careless once at great cost. The Holt brothers came together, both of them in their 30s and resembling each other the way men do when they've spent their whole lives working in the same weather. Domingo came with his eldest son Carlos, who sat against the wall and said nothing but watched everything. 3 others, Vasquez, Pittman, and a widow named Cecilia Brand, who ran the northernmost spread in the valley and whom Rose had never met, but who came in, looked at the evidence spread on the table and said, "I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with that deed offer. My late husband would have walked into it. I almost did," and sat down with the focused attention of a woman who intended to understand every word. Wade stood at the end of the table and let Rose speak. She had not asked him to do that. He had simply positioned himself there, present and available and clearly in agreement. And the combination of her words and his presence in the room had an effect she calculated carefully. The men who might have dismissed her recalibrated, and the ones who were already listening listened harder. She laid out the fraud piece by piece, the false recorder entries, the moved boundary stake, Bellows and the hotel meeting, the backdated deeds, the water rights gambit. She did not editorialize, and she did not raise her voice, and when she was finished, she said, "He's been doing this to each of you separately for 2 years. He made sure you didn't compare notes. That's the only way this works. Divide and isolate and pick off one at a time." She looked around the table. "We stop that tonight." George Fowler spoke first. "What do you need from us?" "Signed statements. Anything you were asked to sign or shown or offered that felt wrong. Dates, names, specific words if you remember them. Every piece helps." She looked at Cecilia Brand. "Especially anyone who has documents. Anything Pruitt's men gave you in writing, offers, surveys, notices. Bring everything." "If we do this," Holt said, "and the commissioner acts, what happens to the rail line?" "The Missouri-Texas route doesn't require your land or Harland land," Rose said. "There's a northern pass that was surveyed in 1871 and abandoned because it was cheaper to try to force us out. If the fraud claim holds, the commissioner has authority to void the fraudulent deeds and mandate the northern route." She paused. "The railroad gets its line. It just doesn't get our water. And if the commissioner doesn't act?" Wade spoke for the first time, from the end of the table, quiet and final. "Then we go over his head to the Federal Land Office in Washington. Rose has already drafted that letter." The room was quiet for a moment. Cecilia Brand said, "You drafted a letter to Washington?" "As a contingency," Rose said. "I hope we don't need it." "Young woman," Cecilia looked at her with an expression Rose couldn't read. "How old are you?" 24. Cecilia looked at Wade, then back at Rose. "Lord help Silas Pruitt," she said, and meant it as a compliment. They wrote statements for 3 hours around that table, 7 ranchers and Domingo and his son, and Henry Calloway, who had come back quietly at 7:30 without being asked, and taken a seat in the corner, and answered every question put to him with the careful sobriety of a man doing penance in the only currency he had left. Rose wrote and witnessed and organized, and by 10 o'clock she had a stack of signed documents that was 3 times the weight of what she'd started with that morning. After the last rider left, she sat at the desk in the quiet house and looked at what they had built. Outside, she could hear Wade walking the perimeter, checking the lock on the barn. the habit he had that she recognized now as the way he processed the end of a day. Movement, accountability, the physical check of a man who had learned not to take safety for granted. She heard his boots on the porch steps and the door, and she heard him stop behind her. 5 days left, she said. We have enough to bury him. We have enough to bury him if the letter gets to Austin. She straightened the stack of documents. If Bellows hasn't gotten to the stage depot first. Wade was quiet for a moment. You think he knows? I think Pruitt knows something happened tonight. Too many horses on the road. Someone will have seen. She turned in the chair to look at him. He's going to move faster now. Whatever he was planning to do in 5 days, he's going to try to do in 2. Wade looked at her with a careful weight she was learning to read. Not absence, not withholding, but a man who thought before he spoke, because he understood that words said wrong couldn't be unsaid. What do you need? He said. She looked at him. The lamp on the desk made the room small and warm, and outside was the enormous, dark Texas night, and inside was this. A man who kept asking that question, and meaning it every time. I need to ride to Amarillo tomorrow, she said. Personally, I need to hand-deliver a copy of everything to the Land Commissioner's regional office, rather than trust the stage. And I need to do it before Pruitt hears that we met tonight. I'll ride with you. It's a full day each way. I know how far Amarillo is, Rose. She looked at him. If we're both gone, the ranch is unprotected. Harker knows what to do. So does Domingo. He said it without discussion, without performance. We ride at first light. He turned toward the hallway. Then he stopped without turning back. You should sleep. We have a long day tomorrow, and you've been running on 2 hours a night since the wedding. I'm fine. I know you're fine. You're always fine. That's not the same as rested. He paused. Your father was right. You don't complain. She heard something in his voice that had not been there in the first days, something that had no edges on it. So I'm paying attention for you. Go to sleep, Rose. She sat at the desk for another moment after he walked down the hall, her hands flat on the stack of documents, listening to the Texas night outside and the quiet house around her, and the sound of him in the room at the end of the hall, doing whatever a man like Wade Harland did in the last minutes before sleep. She imagined checking his rifle, the particular habit of a former ranger who had learned that the night was never entirely safe. She extinguished the lamp. She climbed the stairs in the dark and went into the second room and lay down, and for the first time since the wedding, she was asleep before the shaking in her hands could start. She did not hear the rider come at midnight. She did not hear the shot that followed. But she heard Wade's voice in the yard below, hard and controlled, and she was out of bed and at the window with her own rifle before she was fully awake, heart hammering, looking down at the lamplight and the shape of Wade standing over a man on the ground and another man on horseback at the gate, who turned and rode away hard before she could make out his face. By the time she reached the yard, Wade had the man on the ground sitting up against the fence post. He was young, 20 at most, and he was shaking, and he had a Missouri-Texas line brand on his saddlebag. Wade looked up at her. His jaw was set the way it got when things had moved past the point of managing and into the point of responding. He was going for the barn, Wade said. Rose looked at the young man. He would not meet her eyes. The documents, she said, not a question. He knew we had the meeting tonight, Wade said. He knew exactly where to look. Rose looked at the saddlebag on the ground beside the young man. A box of matches. A bottle of kerosene. The kind of quiet, specific preparation that Silas Pruitt had apparently been sending toward them, in one form or another, since the day they'd said their vows. 4 days, she said. 4 days, Wade agreed. She looked at him across the lamplight, and the man on the ground between them. And what she saw on his face was not fear, and it was not fury. It was the same thing she felt in her own chest,
hard and clear and certain. They were going to Amarillo at first light, and Pruitt had just made his first mistake. The young man's name was Eddie Price, and he was 19 years old, and he had a mother in Fort Worth who didn't know where he was.
Rose got this information in the first 10 minutes, not because she interrogated him, but because Wade sat him down at the kitchen table with coffee and said nothing. And silence had a way of filling itself when a scared young man was sitting in a stranger's kitchen at midnight, waiting to find out what came next. Eddie talked the way people talk when they are more afraid of the quiet than of the consequences. Fast, in pieces, circling back to fill in what he'd left out. Pruitt had hired him 3 weeks ago in Amarillo. Cash money, simple job, just watch the Harland place and report back. He didn't know about the fraud. He said this twice, and Rose believed him the second time. He was a ranch hand without work, which was common enough in the Panhandle in a dry year, and Pruitt's man had offered him more money than he'd seen in 6 months. "Tonight they told me to come out and burn the barn," Eddie said. His hands were wrapped around the coffee cup, and he was staring at the table. "Just the barn, no house. They said make sure the building was empty first." He looked up at Wade. "I wasn't going to hurt anybody." "You were going to destroy evidence in a federal fraud case," Rose said, not unkindly. "That's a criminal charge, Eddie. That's not a small thing." His face went white. "Or," she said, "you can write down every conversation you had with Pruitt's man, every instruction, every payment, names, dates, locations." She pushed paper toward him across the table. "And you can ride back to Amarillo tonight and go home to Fort Worth, and we never had this conversation." He looked at Wade. "She's offering you something fair," Wade said. "I'd take it." Eddie wrote for 20 minutes. His handwriting was uneven, and the spelling was poor in places. But the content was clear and specific, and included the name of Pruitt's man, a lawyer named Aldrich, who worked out of an Amarillo office building and wore city shoes, and had, according to Eddie, told him that the woman at the Harland place was trouble that needed to be contained before she caused problems for the whole valley. Rose read the statement twice. Then she witnessed it and folded it into the locked box, and told Eddie to leave his horse and take the dun from the barn, because his horse had come up lame from the hard night ride, and she wasn't sending him back on a suffering animal, regardless of why he'd come. Eddie Price stood at the door with his hat in his hands, and looked at her with the expression of a young man who had expected punishment and received something he didn't have a category for. "Ma'am," he said. "Go home, Eddie." She looked at him steadily. "And don't come back." He went. Wade shut the door, and they stood in the kitchen in the late quiet, and Rose put both hands on the table and breathed out through her nose, and thought about everything that had just happened, and everything that needed to happen in the next 4 days. And about Aldrich, with his city shoes, running instructions from Amarillo office. "He'll tell Pruitt we had him," Wade said. "Yes, by morning." She straightened. "Which means our window in Amarillo is smaller than I thought. If Aldrich knows we're coming, he'll move to protect whatever's still in that county office." She looked at Wade. "We need to leave in 2 hours, not at first light." He didn't argue. He went to get the horses. They rode out at 2 in the morning, under a sky so full of stars it looked almost violent. The kind of sky that Texas produced in the deep of a clear night that made you feel simultaneously insignificant and entirely awake. Rose had her saddlebag with a locked box and a second bag with a full set of documents. Wade rode with his rifle out of the scabbard and across his saddle, and she noticed it and did not comment on it because it was the right call, and they both knew it. They rode without speaking for the first hour. The land was flat and open, and their horses moved through it at a ground-eating pace that Wade set and Rose matched. She was not a delicate rider, She had been on horseback since she was 4 years old, and she rode the way she did everything, efficiently, with attention, without waste. Somewhere past the first hour, Wade said, "Tell me about your mother." She looked over at him in the dark. "You've told me what she built," he said. "What she prepared. What she left you." He kept his eyes on the road. "Tell me who she was." Rose was quiet for a moment. She thought about Margaret Calloway, who had been born in Kentucky and come to Texas at 19 and had learned to run a ranch the same way she had learned to do everything, by deciding it was necessary and then doing it, regardless of whether anyone believed she could. She was stubborn, Rose said, not in the way that makes people difficult, in the way that makes people safe. She paused. She decided early that the people who worked our land were our responsibility, not our employees. She knew all their children's names. When Domingo's son was sick, she rode out there herself and sat with Maria for 2 days. She looked at the dark horizon. She also kept a ledger with every debt anyone owed us, and she collected on every one of them. Not because she needed the money, because she said debt left unpaid between neighbors becomes resentment, and resentment was more dangerous than drought. She sounds like someone who understood how things actually worked. She understood that the pretty version of something and the true version were usually different, and that you had to deal with the true version even when the pretty one was easier. Rose shifted in the saddle. She would have had those documents filed in Austin before Pruitt ever made his first move. I was 6 months behind where she would have been. You were also managing a failing ranch, a sick father, an absent sister, and a fraud case simultaneously, Wade said. With no help. She would have managed all of that too. Maybe, but you're not behind her, Rose. You're standing where she stood. He paused. That's not nothing. She looked at him. He was watching the road, face forward, and she could see the line of his jaw and the set of his shoulders and the way he carried the rifle. Relaxed, but present. The particular alertness of a man who had learned that danger came from the direction you were watching, and also from the one you weren't. Your partner, she said, the one you lost. His hands shifted slightly on the reins. I read about the Del Rio incident in the ranger records, she said. My mother's land office contact sent them when I was researching the valley history. It mentioned your name. He was quiet long enough that she thought she'd crossed a line. Then he said, Tommy Reeves. Yes. We'd been partners 4 years. He had a wife in San Antonio and twin boys who were 3 years old. He was looking straight ahead, and his voice was level in the way that leveled voices are when the thing underneath them is anything but. We went into that canyon because I read the situation wrong. I thought we had time. I thought the threat was less than it was. He paused. Tommy trusted my read. He always trusted my read. And you've been second-guessing it ever since. Every decision I've made since Del Rio, I've made slow. Checked it twice. Made sure I wasn't reading what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. He looked at her briefly. It's made me careful. It's made you good, she said. At what you do, at reading situations correctly. Except the one time it mattered. One time, she said, and there was no softness in it, just plain fact. You've been paying for one mistake for 6 years, Wade. Tommy Reeves had a wife and sons and a life, and I'm sorry he's gone. I truly am. But you're not going to pay that debt down by keeping yourself in a canyon forever. The silence that followed was long enough that she counted the hoofbeats in it. 12, 15, 20. And then he said quietly, You're the second person to say something like that to me. Who was the first? Tommy's wife. 3 years after. She came out here to say it in person, because she said she knew I wouldn't hear it in a letter. Smart woman. Yes. He exhaled slowly. I still couldn't hear it. Can you hear it now? He thought about that for a long time. Getting there, he said. They reached Amarillo as the town was waking up, the early commerce of a morning in a growing city beginning to move through the streets. Freight wagons and the smell of coffee from the hotel kitchen, and a blacksmith already at his forge. Rose had been to Amarillo 4 times in her life. Wade had been more recently, and he knew where the regional land commissioner's office was, which saved them 20 minutes. The office was on the 2nd floor of a stone building on the main street, with a brass plate on the door and a clerk at the front desk who looked up at them with a particular expression of a government employee assessing whether a visitor was going to make his morning complicated. "We need to see Commissioner Aldridge," Rose said. "Not his deputy, the commissioner himself." "Commissioner Aldridge doesn't take unscheduled." "My name is Rose Harland. My husband is Wade Harland. We are here regarding a fraud case involving Judge Silas Pruitt, the county recorder's office, the Missouri-Texas line, and approximately 9 separate land parcels in the southern Panhandle Valley." She set the locked box on the clerk's desk. "I have signed statements from 7 landowners, original documents showing fraudulent title transfers, physical evidence of boundary tampering, and a signed account from an eyewitness to a bribery transaction." She held his eyes. "I'm happy to wait, but every hour I wait is an hour Pruitt's lawyer has to warn him that we're here." The clerk looked at the box, then at Rose, then at Wade, who said nothing, and needed to say nothing, because he was simply standing there, which was in itself a complete statement. "One moment," the clerk said, and went through the inner door. They waited 12 minutes. Commissioner Aldridge was a compact, white-haired man in his 60s, who wore his authority the way men wore good boots, broken in, comfortable, not trying to prove anything. He looked at them over his glasses when they came in and gestured to the chairs across from his desk and said, "Mrs. Harlan, Mr. Harlan, I understand this is urgent." "Yes, sir," Rose said. She opened the locked box and began to lay documents on his desk in the order she had organized them. Fraud summary first, then the recorder evidence, then the boundary survey, then the signed statements, then Domingo's account, then Eddie Price's statement from last night, still slightly warm from the inside of her coat where she'd carried it. She talked for 25 minutes without stopping. She had rehearsed this in her head on the night ride in, and the practice showed. She was clear and sequential, and she answered his 3 interrupting questions without losing her thread. And when she was finished, she sat with her hands in her lap and waited. Aldridge looked at the documents. He read 3 of them in full. He picked up the recorder pages and held them to the window light and looked at the alteration marks for a long time. "Bellows has been in that office for 9 years, he said, not to either of them specifically. "He has a gambling debt in Amarillo," Rose said. "I have the record from the house bank on 5th Street. He owed $400 as of March. It was paid in full in April." Aldridge looked at her. "How did you get that?" "My mother's contact at the land office has a sister who works at the bank." She paused. "My mother built good relationships." "Clearly." He set the papers down. He looked at Wade. "Mr. Harlan, you've reviewed all of this." "Every word," Wade said. "And you're in agreement with your wife's assessment of the situation?" "My wife's assessment is the most thorough account of land fraud I've seen since I was a ranger." Wade held the commissioner's eyes. "If you've got something that contradicts it, I'd like to see it. Otherwise, yes." Something shifted in Aldridge's expression. Not quite a smile, but the movement of a man who had revised his expectations upward. "Judge Pruitt has political relationships in this territory," he said carefully. "This won't be a simple process." "I'm not asking for simple," Rose said. "I'm asking for correct." She paused. "Pruitt files in 4 days. If he files and the fraudulent deeds are on record before you've moved to challenge them, The burden shifts, and we're fighting uphill for years. 9 families are depending on the timing. She held his gaze. I need to know if you're going to act before Monday. Aldridge folded his hands on his desk and looked at the stack of documents Rose had built over the course of a year and brought to him through a night ride across 60 miles of open Texas. I'm going to need to keep these originals, he said. I have copies. Rose reached into her second saddlebag and produced a complete duplicate set, bound with cord and labeled in her handwriting. These are yours. The originals go back with me. Aldridge looked at the copy set, then at the original set, then at Rose. You made 2 complete sets, he said. I made 3. The third is in a locked drawer at my father's ranch in the care of his foreman, with instructions to deliver it to the federal land office in Washington if he doesn't hear from me by Tuesday morning. The silence in the room had a particular quality to it. Mrs. Harland, Aldridge said, and for the first time something in his voice sounded less like official assessment and more like plain, honest reaction.
How long did it take you to prepare all of this?
Almost a year. She looked at him steadily. My mother started it before that. She thought the railroad was coming for the valley, and she was right. She died before she could finish what she started. Rose paused. I finished it. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his drawer, pulled out a form, and began to write. I'm issuing a hold order on all active filing claims in the Southern Panhandle Valley, pending fraud investigation, he said as he wrote. That includes anything Pruitt submits Monday or before. Nothing records until this is resolved. He signed the form and pressed his seal to it and held it out. Take this to the county recorder's office. Not Bellows, the head recorder. Man named Hargrove on the 3rd floor. Tell him it supersedes any instruction from Pruitt or his office. Rose took the form. She read it completely before she put it in her bag. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Bring me a conviction. He looked at them both. And ride careful going back. If Pruitt's lawyer is in this city, he knows you're here. He was right about that. They were 3 blocks from the land office when Rose saw Aldrich. City shoes, gray suit, the particular walk of a man moving with purpose and trying not to look like it. He was coming from the direction of the telegraph office, which told her everything she needed to know about what he'd spent the last hour doing. He saw her at the same moment. He stopped on the sidewalk. Rose stopped walking. Wade stopped beside her. Aldrich looked at the saddlebags, at the locked box on Rose's saddle, at Wade, who was very still in the way that former rangers went still when a situation was being calculated. Mrs. Harland, Aldrich said pleasantly, fancy seeing you in the city. Mr. Aldrich, Rose kept her voice conversational. I've just come from Commissioner Aldrich's office. Is that so? He's issued a hold order on all Valley filings. I have a copy. She tilted her head slightly. I imagine you'll want to wire Pruitt about that. I imagine you already have. Something behind Aldrich's pleasant expression looked at her with something that was not pleasant at all. You've been very busy, he said. I have. She held his gaze. There's a statement from Edward Price in the commissioner's file. He worked for you briefly. He sends his regards. Aldrich's face did not change, but his hands did. A tightening, fractional, the kind of physical tell that a man couldn't entirely control. I don't know anyone by that name, he said. That's all right. Rose gathered her reins. Commissioner Aldrich does now. She touched her horse forward, and Wade fell in beside her, and they left Aldrich on the sidewalk without looking back. They were out of the city and back on the open road before Wade said anything. The sun was high and flat, and they were pushing the horses because there was still 60 miles to cover, and a ranch that Harker was guarding with 3 men, and a situation that had just moved 3 moves forward at once.
He's going to move tonight, Wade said. I know. We can't outride the telegraph. No. Rose looked at the horizon. But we have the hold order, and we have Aldridge moving. And Pruitt knows we have Aldridge moving, which means whatever he does next, he does it knowing we have the commissioner's backing. She paused. He's out of quiet options. That makes him more dangerous, not less. Yes, she said, it does. She rode without speaking for a while, thinking about the hold order in her bag and the documents in the locked box, and the 60 miles between her and a ranch that Pruitt now had direct incentive to destroy before she got back to it. She was thinking about Harker and his 3 men, and whether 3 was enough. She was thinking about her father, who had ridden back to Callaway Land yesterday, and whom she had not thought to warn this morning before they left. She was thinking about the expression on Aldrich's face when she'd mentioned Eddie Price. "Wade," she said. "Yeah?" "My father's alone at Callaway Ranch." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Harker," Wade said, and pulled his horse up and turned to the man riding 20 yards behind them, who had come as escort without being asked, because that was the kind of man Harker was. "Ride to Callaway Ranch," Wade said. "Now. Stay with Henry until we're back." Harker didn't ask why. He turned his horse and rode. Rose watched him go and felt something in her chest settle by 1 degree. Not all the way, not enough, but 1 degree in the right direction. She looked at Wade, and he looked at her, and the road stretched out between them, and the city behind them, and the ranch ahead. And there was nothing left to do but ride. "He's going to try to break us apart," she said. "Tonight or tomorrow. He's going to try to separate us and take what he can." "I know." Wade looked at her steadily from the back of the gray. "He's going to fail." She held his eyes for a moment in the flat afternoon light. "How can you be sure?" she said. "Because I've been watching how you work for 10 days, he said. "And I've never once seen you not be ready for the thing that came next." She looked at him. And then, because there was nothing to say to that was sufficient, and the road was long and they needed to move, she turned forward and urged her horse into a run. And Wade came alongside her, and they rode into the wide open Texas afternoon, side by side, and did not slow down. They rode into the ranch yard at dusk to find Domingo Reyes standing at the gate with a rifle and 3 of his sons behind him. And Rose knew before she dismounted that something had happened while they were gone. Domingo's face told her it was bad. Not the worst. The ranch was standing, the barn was intact, no smoke, but bad enough that he had come himself rather than sending word. "They took the cattle," he said. "North pasture, same as before. Fence cut clean. Happened this afternoon while Harker was at Callaway Ranch." He looked at Wade. 40 head. Your best breeding stock." Wade dismounted without a word. His face had gone very still in the particular way she had learned to recognize. Not absence, but the opposite. Everything focused inward and calculating. "How many men?" he said. "Carlos tracked them to the canyon road. 4 riders, maybe 5, moving the herd northeast." Domingo paused. "Toward Pruitt's holding." "He's not even hiding it anymore," Rose said. "He doesn't have to hide it anymore." Wade looked at her. "The hold order stopped his legal play, so now he's telling us what happens when legal plays fail." His jaw was set hard. "He wants me to come after the cattle. He wants me to ride into that canyon angry and outnumbered." "Then we don't go angry, and we don't go outnumbered." Rose was already thinking. The same cold accounting she had done every time this week that something had been taken, or threatened, or burned. "We go with the hold order, the commissioner's backing, and enough witnesses that whatever he does next, he does in front of people who will testify." She looked at Domingo.
Can you get word to the other ranchers tonight? Fowler, the Holtz, Vasquez, Cecilia Brand.
My boys can ride.
Tell them to come armed and come to the canyon road by midnight. She looked at Wade. We're not going to take the cattle back by force. We're going to go get them legally, with 7 ranchers standing behind us and a federal hold order in my hand. And we're going to make Pruitt show his cards in front of witnesses. Domingo looked at her for a moment, and then at Wade. Your wife, he said to Wade, thinks like your mother did, to Rose.
I'll take that, Rose said. They had 4 hours. Rose spent the first one at the desk writing a rapid account of everything that had happened since their return, adding it to the running record she had been keeping since the wedding. She wrote Aldridge's name, and the hold order number, and the details of the Amarillo meeting, and Eddie Price's statement, and Aldridge on the sidewalk, and the cattle missing from the north pasture. And she wrote it all in the same clear hand she had used for every document in the locked box, because she had learned from her mother that the record was the thing that outlasted everything else. Wade came in while she was writing. Harker's back, he said. Your father's all right. Harker got there before anyone came. Rose exhaled through her nose. Good. Your father wants to ride with us tonight. She looked up. He's been sober 4 days, Wade said. He was not telling her to decide one way. He was giving her the fact and leaving it with her. She thought about her father in the kitchen that morning, his working face, the way he had answered every question with the careful sobriety of a man doing penance. She thought about what her mother would have said. Tell him to come, she said. But he rides with Harker, not out front. Wade nodded and went back out. She finished the record and locked the box and went to get her rifle. They rode out at 11, a company of 14 people on the canyon road. Wade and Rose at the front, Domingo and his sons behind them, then Fowler and the Holtz, who had come within an hour of the message, then Cecilia Brand, who had arrived with 2 of her own hands, and a shotgun she carried with the ease of someone who had been carrying one for 30 years. Henry Calloway rode with Harker at the back, and Rose did not look back to check on him, because she had given him her trust, and she intended to mean it. The night was clear and cold, and the canyon road ran between 2 lines of low rock that caught the moonlight and threw it back silver. They rode without lamps because Rose had decided dark was better than announced, and she had decided a great many things about how this night would go. She had also decided what she would do if it went differently than planned. The cattle were in a holding pen at the mouth of the canyon. She could hear them before she could see them, the particular low, restless sound of animals in an unfamiliar place. There were 4 men at the pen, and a fire, and a larger shape beyond. A canvas structure, temporary, the kind of quick setup that said, "We intended to be here for 2 days at most." And standing at the fire, visible from 100 yards in the clear night, was Silas Pruitt. He had come himself. Rose had not expected that. She revised everything she thought she'd known about how tonight would go and filed it in the column of things that needed new accounting. He's making a statement, Wade said quietly beside her. He's daring us, she said. He wants this to be a confrontation. He wants witnesses to see him winning. Then we give him witnesses seeing something else. They rode forward. Pruitt heard them coming and did not move, which told Rose he had been expecting them and had positioned himself where he wanted to be. His 4 men moved to flank him. 2 had rifles already raised. Behind Rose, she heard the 14 riders spread into a line, shoulder to shoulder, the particular sound of a unified front finding its shape. And she knew without looking that it was exactly what it needed to look like. She pulled up 20 feet from Pruitt and did not dismount. "Judge Pruitt," she said, "those cattle belong to Harland Ranch. I'd like them back." Pruitt looked at the line of riders behind her. Something moved across his face. Surprise, recalculation. But he controlled it quickly.
He had the politician's gift of composing himself in public, and Rose did not underestimate it. "Mrs. Harland," he spread his hands, "these cattle were found on disputed territory. I'm holding them pending resolution of the land claim." "There is no active land claim." Rose reached into her coat and produced the hold order. She did not hand it to him. She held it up so his men could see it, so the ranchers behind her could see it, so the night itself could see it. Commissioner Aldridge issued this hold order yesterday morning. All Valley land claims are suspended pending fraud investigation. You have no legal basis to hold these animals. Pruitt's jaw tightened. One document, signed and sealed by the Regional Land Commissioner. She kept her voice even. I also have the fraud filing number, the names of 7 witnesses, 3 sets of supporting documents in 3 separate locations, and a record of Eddie Price's midnight visit to Harland Ranch 2 nights ago. She paused. Shall I keep going? The fire crackled. One of Pruitt's men shifted his weight. You think a hold order protects you, Pruitt said, and his voice had dropped the pleasant register and gone to something underneath it. Something that had always been there, and was simply no longer bothering to wear the coat over it. You think a piece of paper from Aldridge, a man I have had in my pocket for 6 years, is going to stop what's already in motion. The night went very still. Behind Rose, she heard someone draw a sharp breath. Fowler, maybe, or one of the Holts. The confession was so naked and sudden that it took a beat to land. Say that again, Wade said. His voice was quiet, and it was the quietest thing in the canyon, and it was the most dangerous. Aldridge is my man, Pruitt said. He was past caring now, Rose realized. He had been building this plan for 2 years, and a woman in a borrowed wedding dress had unbuilt it in 10 days, and something in him had cracked past the point of management. Has been since he took the appointment. Every complaint you filed went through his office. Every document you think you sent to Austin came back to me. He looked at Rose, and his voice had the cold, bright edge of a man who had decided that if he was going down, he would do it standing. Did you really think one rancher's daughter with a locked box was going to walk into his office and undo 2 years of work? Rose looked at him, and then she looked at the rider who had appeared at the far edge of the firelight 3 minutes ago, and whom Pruitt had not noticed, because Pruitt had been watching her. Commissioner Aldridge sat on a bay horse with a federal marshal on one side of him and a second marshal on the other, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had just heard himself named as corrupt in front of 14 witnesses and 2 federal officers, and who had, apparently, ridden 60 miles through the night to be here in time to hear it. Pruitt saw him 2 seconds after Rose looked. The silence that followed was the most complete Rose had ever experienced. Commissioner, Pruitt said. His voice had lost everything. Judge Pruitt, Aldridge's voice was entirely composed. I received a telegraph last night from a Mrs. Rose Harland, indicating that you might attempt to interfere with her property before I could arrive. He looked at Pruitt with the expression of a man who has made his decision and made it clean. I rode through the night with Marshals Crane and Devitt to ensure that didn't happen. He paused. I also brought the original fraud complaint she filed, which has already been transmitted to the Federal Land Office in Washington, before I left Amarillo. Rose had sent that telegraph from the Amarillo hotel before they'd ridden home. She had not told Wade because she had not wanted to build hope on a contingency that might not arrive in time. But Aldridge had come. She felt something in her chest release that had been held tight for so long she had forgotten it was held. Marshal Crane, Aldridge said, please take Judge Pruitt into custody. Pruitt did not run. Whatever else he was not a man who ran. He stood at his fire while Marshal Crane came forward with the irons,
and he looked at Rose with an expression she did not flinch from and would not forget. "This valley will still have a railroad," he said. "Yes," Rose agreed. "Through the northern pass, where it should have gone from the start." She held his eyes.
The ranchers in this valley are willing to grant right-of-way access for the northern route at fair market price. I sent that offer to the Missouri-Texas Line's actual board of directors, not their regional men, the board, last Tuesday. She paused. "You've been obsolete for a week, Judge Pruitt. You just didn't know it yet." He looked at her for one more moment, and then Marshal Crane turned him away from the fire, and that was the last time Rose Calloway Harlan ever looked Silas Pruitt in the eyes. The cattle went home that night. All 40 head moved back through the canyon road under lantern light, Domingo sons driving them easy and quiet, while the ranchers, who had come armed and ready, stood back and watched and let themselves breathe out. Cecilia Brand rode alongside Rose on the way back and said nothing for a long time, and then said, "Your mother would have done exactly what you just did, right down to the telegraph." "I learned from her letters," Rose said. "She wrote good letters." Cecilia looked at the cattle moving ahead of them. "She wrote me one once, after my husband died, telling me that a woman who could run a ranch could run anything, and not to let anyone tell me different." She paused. "I've been doing it for 11 years on that word." "She meant it," Rose said. "I know she did. That's why I'm still there." They reached the ranch near 2 in the morning, and the ranchers dispersed one by one, going home to their own lands and their own families, each of them carrying in their saddlebags a copy of the hold order and the fraud complaint number that Rose had written out by hand that evening before they'd left. She had made 14 copies. She had not explained why to anyone. They would understand in the morning when the news from Amarillo started moving through the valley, and they would want the documentation in hand. Henry Calloway was the last to leave. He stood at the gate with his horse and his hat and looked at his daughter in the lamplight from the porch, and Rose went to him. "You were right about the meeting," he said, "getting the ranchers together. I should have done that a year ago." "You weren't ready a year ago." "No." He turned his hat. "Rose, your mother's files. The work she started and you finished." He looked at her. "She would have been proud of you tonight. I want you to know that I am aware of that, and I am saying it out loud because I have not said enough things out loud that needed saying." He paused. "I'm proud of you. I have been for a long time. I just forgot how to say it while I was busy grieving." Rose looked at her father. She thought about the 18 months, the ledgers and the letters and the early mornings, and the evidence gathered in careful layers while he sat in the parlor. She thought about walking down that aisle alone, and the veil she had burned, and the locked box against her ribs. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, and felt him hold on, shaky and real. The way fathers hold on when they finally understand what they almost lost. "Go home, Papa," she said. "Sleep. Come back in the morning and bring the Calloway ledgers. We need to start integrating the accounts properly." He laughed into her shoulder. It was rusty and genuine. "Business even now." "Always." She stepped back. "Good night." She watched him ride, and then went back to the porch where Wade was standing with 2 cups of coffee, which he handed one to her without comment. And they stood side by side and watched the last of the riders disappear into the dark. "Aldridge," Wade said. "You sent him a telegraph." "Contingency." "From the hotel in Amarillo, before we rode home." "While you were getting the horses." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I needed him to come himself. Not send a deputy, not send a clerk. Come himself, on record, in person. The only way to make that happen was to tell him Pruitt was going to confess in front of witnesses. She paused. I didn't know he was going to confess. I thought it was a reasonable possibility. You gambled. I calculated. She looked at him. There's a difference. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw it again. The thing that had been building since the first morning in the barn, since the kitchen table with her father, since the road to Amarillo and back, since he had stood next to her in Domingo's yard and signed his name below hers without being asked. It was full now in a way it hadn't been before. Clear and specific, the way the Texas sky was clear after a storm had worked itself out. Rose, he said. I know, she said. He set his cup down on the porch rail. I need to say it, he said. I'm not a man who says things easily, and you know that. But I've been a man who held things in too long, and let that cost me. And I don't intend to do it again. He turned to face her. I told you at the altar that I didn't know what to do with you. That was true. I'd never known anyone like you, and I didn't have a category for you, and that made me careful in ways that probably looked like cold. It looked like cold, she said. I know. I'm sorry for that. He looked at her directly, no looking away, no hedging. What I know now is that you are the most capable, clear-minded, fearless person I have ever known. And that includes every man I rode with in the Rangers. And I have been watching you for 10 days. And every single day I have seen something that made me think, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be standing next to this. He paused. And then I decided that wasn't the right question. The right question was whether I was going to be worthy of it. Whether I could be the kind of man who stood next to someone like you without making you smaller. Rose looked at him. Her chest was doing something she didn't entirely have control over. You have never once made me smaller, she said. I intend to keep it that way. He reached up and touched her face, his thumb at her cheekbone, the first entirely gentle thing she had seen his hands do. I chose this marriage 10 days ago because a woman told me the truth when she didn't have to, and that counted for something. I'm choosing it again right now because I love you. He said it plainly, no performance, just the word placed where it needed to be. And I know 10 days is not long enough to say that by any reasonable measure. But I have been a ranger, and I have been alone, and I have been building something in silence for 6 years. And I know what it feels like when something is worth protecting. And you are worth everything I have. Rose set her own cup down on the porch rail. I burned my sister's wedding veil the morning I married you, she said. Not because I was angry at Eleanor, because I was making a decision that I needed to make without anything pulling me backward. She looked at him. I have not once, since that morning, wished I had made a different one. She stepped toward him. I love you, Wade. I think I started loving you when you said continue in that chapel, before you had any reason to. And I have been adding to it every day since. She let herself say it the way she said everything that mattered. Straight, without softening, without apology. You are not a man who doesn't deserve good things. You are a man who stopped believing he did. And that is different. And it is something I intend to spend a long time disagreeing with you about. He kissed her then, in the lamplight, on the porch of a ranch that was both of theirs, with the cattle settled in the north pasture, and the documents safe in the locked box, and Pruitt in irons 60 miles away, and the whole valley quiet around them for the first time in longer than either of them could easily calculate. He kissed her the way a man kisses someone when he has finally stopped bracing for the thing to be taken away. When they pulled apart, she stayed close, and he kept his hand against her face, and the Texas night was enormous and full of stars that had watched all of it. The burning veil, the chapel, the canyon, the fire, the 60 miles there and back. and had not looked away.
3 years later, Rose Harland stood at her mother's grave on a clear September morning with a letter in her hand and her daughter on her hip, 14 months old, with her father's dark eyes and Rose's set jaw. And she read the letter from the Federal Land Office in Washington, confirming the final resolution of Pruitt's case. 7 counts of fraud, 3 of corruption. The Missouri-Texas line rerouted through the Northern Pass. The valley's water rights secured in perpetuity for the ranchers who had stood together on a canyon road in the dark. She folded the letter and held it against her chest and looked at the headstone that read, Margaret Calloway, who built something worth keeping. "We kept it, Mama," she said. "All of it." Wade came up behind her and put his arm around her, and their daughter grabbed his collar with both hands and said something emphatic in the language of a person who has not yet learned words, but has strong opinions nonetheless. And Rose laughed, and the morning held all of it. The grief and the work and the love that had come out of a burning veil and a borrowed dress, and a single word spoken in a chapel by a man who had chosen to trust a woman he didn't know yet. She had stepped into her sister's place in an arranged marriage and found, in the wreckage of everything that was supposed to happen, something that was entirely her own. Not because it had been given to her, because she had built it, the same way her mother had built everything that mattered, deliberately, in layers, from the ground up, with her hands and her mind and her stubborn refusal to let go of what was worth keeping. Wade Harland had looked at her once across a chapel full of people waiting for her to fail, and he had chosen her every single day since, the same way she had chosen him. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to, which was the only choice that had ever been worth making.